which is always a mystery. She's almost like finding Carmen Sandiego, where Michelle Mitchell is in the world at any given time.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. I know Sean normally introduces these things, but he couldn't this morning, so I will be introducing ourselves. This is Michelle Lott, and she has many, many years of experience in regulatory and quality. She's the principal and founder of Lean RAQA. She's been a great mentor for me over the number of years, and primarily we help startups and small to mid-sized companies bring new technologies to market. And my name is Tianna Benson, and I will be her co-host, providing lots of color commentary on all this research that was done by the Lean team and ourselves on, what's really happening at FDA in 2025, and a little bit, like Michelle said, looking into the crystal ball here, trying to predict what may or may not happen. So, Michelle,
Yep.
if you want to go ahead and share your screen, and we can go ahead and get started here.
All right, perfect. So, like Ty said, we're a little bit reading the tea leaves for sure, reading between the lines of a lot of things that are happening in the agency right now. I was asked several months ago, like way back in May, and somebody's like, "What do you think is the FDA is going to look like over the next year?" And I'm like, to be honest, I can't tell you what the FDA is going to look like tomorrow. So now we've gotten a little bit more information under our wings, and so we're gonna like tie those things together as best as we can here. So Ty has already introduced us. This is the C-suite. So if you hear any background noise, they're probably trying to correct me in some way. So we're going to talk about the snowball effect of the administration. We're going to talk about the transition from QSR to QMSR and the differences between QMSR and ISO 1345. And we're going to close with FDA inspections. So what is the snowball effect that this administration has had on medical devices? So there was an executive order issued in January 2025, came out January 20th, the regulatory freeze for any new or pending regulations for at least 60 days, although we see that freeze kind of continuing now. January 31 came out with the order for a 10-to-1, like for every one regulation that they publish, 10 regulations have to be revoked. And we have some very interesting examples of the impact of that coming up. Then on February 11th, the workforce optimization, otherwise known as the RIFs, for any one new hire within a government agency, including the FDA, 4 employees must be terminated. And this is above and beyond the RIFs. So this is an example of, on the food side, of how FDA is going about this deregulation process. And we're using this as examples because FDA is starting with food, then they move to drugs, and then they move to medical devices. So we predict that what they're doing in food and drugs is going to trickle down to how they're going to deregulate medical devices. So they have started pretty aggressively revoking obsolete standards, which is much needed across all sectors that FDA governs. And then they issued RFI according to this deregulatory plan to lower cost and empower providers, which, for those of you who know, that the FDA fee this year for an establishment and registration is over $11,000. This is fascinating that they're increasing fees, but they're trying to lower their costs. So it's a very good business model, actually. So this is fascinating.
Yeah, this is a good one.
This is an example of the deregulation at work. So in de novo, when you get granted the de novo, what happens is that you get a classification order and a decision order on that, and they issue a brand new product code and a brand new regulation number. So here we see we've got the new product code QVL. We have a regulation number that is 8883047. And so typically you can click through and see all the letters that are involved. And you can also normally click through or look up the regulation number and what is the regulation saying. So now they're creating placeholders for the regulation number when and if they can start assigning regulations again. But for now, it's just a placeholder, because if you were to go look up 8883047, that should have been released at the same time this de novo was granted. It says no results found. So this is typically what it looks like. You typically get the letter of where it granted the de novo, and then you get the special controls decision summary explaining all that. So Ty, you want to
Yeah,
add something?
I think what's really important here to understand from an industry perspective is that FDA is still, one, they are still clearing de novos or granting de novos and clearing them as a 510(k). So you can still use the de novo pathway. What's a problem, or it could be a competitive advantage if you have the de novo yourself, is that you can't use de novos right now as a predicate because you do not have the information available to use that device as a predicate. You can't quote the
Mhm.
regulation. You don't have a copy of what the special controls are for that de novo. And typically, if you're using a de novo as a predicate, FDA is very strict on making sure that you follow those special controls. And the decision summary kind of acts a little bit like the 510(k) summary, where you have, you know, a peek into the window of the work that was done. And so if you want to leverage a de novo that's coming out, you can't right now. But if you have a de novo and you are one of these, 18 or so that were cleared this year, I mean, that's a nice competitive advantage because no one has any information. By the time you do a freedom of information request, it'll be 2 years or 3 years, and this might be resolved. Who knows? So it's just this interesting place that industry's in right now because regulations can't be issued, so they can't tell you what's going on.
Yep, exactly. Um, so that really leaves us, we have a lot of missing pieces to the puzzle in terms of predicate strategy. And so you've got, if you are gonna get a de novo granted this year, like Ty said, you're gonna be at a huge competitive advantage because the information as a whole is not enough that is publicly available to really build a predicate strategy out of. So FDA's call to action, they asked the public to commentate on what regulations should be removed and why. It said it was a 60-day public commentary period that started on May 13 of this year, but that commentary period is still open. The website is still up for them to gather this deregulation suggestions from the public. Now, I even went in and because they said not only does it apply to regulations, it applies to guidance documents and just any unnecessary regulatory controls. So I was going to go in and propose starting with like some of the oldest guidance documents to get rid of them and why. And it was like an extremely burdensome process
Yeah.
to describe in all the different levels of specificity that they wanted to see, and to be able to actually submit something. But what is interesting is that you can put your name on it. Like if I want to say Lean RAQA said that this was a bad idea or outdated or stupid, I can put Lean RAQA on the thing for the redaction to be named because of Lean RAQA and Michelle and Ty.
What is also really interesting about this is that um, it was also publicly available. So whoever wanted to redact anything, you could see it. And some people, like some companies, were responding to redaction requests, being like, we disagree with this. So it was really kind of an interesting, interesting place to see kind of who's positioning what, because there's no hiding if you're trying to get rid of something that, might be burdensome, but is really there for safety and efficacy purposes. And I see a comment here that said AvaMed did a working group and suggested a list based on old, outdated guidance documents, kind of like Lean RAQA. And yes, it was very time consuming. It also didn't have the option to point out where documents should be updated, where what the agency is thinking doesn't match what is in this guidance document. It's not that the guidance document shouldn't be there, but it needed revision.
Right. An example of that is we recently had a conversation with the agency over, in their feedback, they had stuff referencing a 1995 guidance document. And then they had a much newer, say 2011 ISO standard that technically and for performance and safety purposes really superseded the 1995 guidance document. And FDA was picking and choosing the kind of feedback that they gave to the sponsor of the 510K of between these two documents. And when we asked them about that and called them on that, they're like, yeah, so clearly that guidance document in 1995 does not reflect our current thinking, and this ISO document from 2011, which was a hot minute ago, is closer to our thinking. So you've got all of these factors kind of coming together that is making it very difficult to not only pull back things, but make things appropriate that are out there and exist. So something else that was interesting is that you had to have a total cost of significantly less than zero when you put a new regulation in. So not only did you have to take 10 out, this one you put in could not add any kind of cost and had to be able to show how it was going to save industry and the government money.
Which is probably why de novos can't get their regulations, because obviously, if you have special controls, there's a cost associated with that.
Exactly. So if we look at how the reduction in forces have affected the agency. So at April 1, the HHS is like laid off 3,500 employees from the FDA that primarily focused on the communication and media department. Then in April 25, they continued those rifts and terminations, but they asked them to return. But the probationary people that were laid off were not asked to return. So in May, the rifts continue, but they get sued. The HHS gets sued for unlawful termination, and then that gets escalated to a U.S. district court, and they temporarily block the RIF actions. But then it gets escalated to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overrules those risks and like around the July the 9th. So most of the people that were reinstated still have their jobs aside from the communications and media department. And Ty and I have seen several examples of the few things that are squeaking out. You find out about through some second or third hand source because they don't have a media department to publish the press releases or the media or, any of those things that they normally do when they publish a new guidance document.
Yeah, this is actually pretty important for anyone who's relying on FDA emails. Like for Michelle and I, we relied on them pretty heavily to tell us, when a new guidance document is coming out or, something that impacts the regulatory world. And there are at least I don't know, they haven't released very many guidance documents, but there were at least two that I can think of that they did not send emails for. So
Mhm.
we found out about it by third-party people
Yeah,
posting on LinkedIn. And they're like, hey, the QSub guidance changed. And we were like,
did it?
did it?
Yeah.
Um,
And so
so
now
really be
that we
looking at the
just,
guidance document list yourself these days.
yeah, yeah. So now we have people that go and look at the actual database for the guidance documents and whatnot to figure out what is the FDA doing, but not communicating.
Yeah.
So what is this impact of the revolving door from the firing of the probationary people and the like, you're fired, and then no, you're not fired, and come back. It was actually quite comical. I heard from a trusted source that the FDA, like, not only do you have the reductions in force and they're laying a lot of people off, but they're also having the return to work, like in the building. And they didn't have enough office spaces. They didn't have enough toilet paper. Like they were totally unprepared to bring people not only back from being fired, but back into the office. So it's been a very interesting transition, both inside and outside the FDA, to figure out like what they're doing, what do they even have resources for? Because clearly they can't write out regulations on toilet paper that they don't have. So this hot off the press, as of October 1, the government shutdown is happening. And that has more impact on the FDA, even beyond just the staffing, because now until the government can resume duties, they cannot take, and I think I need to switch slides here right
Next
now.
slide, yeah.
Yep. So they cannot take any kind of new medical device submission. So if you already have a submission, be it a 510K, de novo, PMA, that you paid the fee for in fiscal year 25, they're going to keep doing those things. They are not taking any new fees of any kind, not only for submissions, but this also includes moving forward fees, like the $11,000 or so, a little north of 11,000 for the fiscal year 26 registration and listing. They're not allowed to accept any money of any kind until they get unfrozen. And so now the FDA is going back to a reduced size until so all those people who just came back, they're like, okay, again, now go back home.
You
Use
know,
your own toilet paper.
what's so interesting about this is I mean, if FDA selected this, I think this is genius on their part because there's so much money and not so much in devices, but in the drug applications that I think industry is going to be very, very upset by this because you're talking about it's the brand new fiscal year. October 1st is when FDA's fiscal year changes. Now we have this delay for renewing your facility registration because you can't pay that fee. But also, a lot of people won't pay the registration fee or they won't pay a submission fee kind of in September if it looks like they may not be able to get it in time because FDA does not refund fees in general. Like it's a very big challenge. So a lot of times people will almost wait a little bit until the fiscal year changes just to avoid the painful paying situation that happens with the
Yeah, so
website.
say you thought you were ready to commercialize in August, there's no probation of the fees. And so you would have to pay $11,000 in August to start marketing between August and October 1. And then October 1 to December, your next $11,000
It's
is due.
due. So a lot of times people wait because they don't want to get double whammied. And now all those people who strategically waited are left in this kind of
Mhm.
nebulous phase right now. I mean, there's really no way to move forward.
And all the people that sat on their regulatory and quality people's heads, like, when's the submission going out? When's the FDA looking at it? Blah, blah, blah. They won't even take money to look at it. So,
You can't even pay them right now.
yeah, yeah. So, give your regulatory and quality people a break on the timeliness of submitting applications.
I thought you were going to say a beer.
Yeah, definitely bring them a strong cocktail to ask them so that they don't punch you. So Ready. So Ready is a conference that FDA puts on every year. Even though it covers like some pretty basic things, it's always very informative to industry because you see how the FDA is perceiving things. Now, this has happened every year for as long as I can remember. They, part of this kind of communication lockdown they are not having Ready this year.
Well, they haven't even advertised that. They just
Yep,
didn't acknowledge its existence. And honestly, I
it's
think this is
usually in
a
the
tragedy.
spring. It's
Oh, I'm
usually
sorry.
in the spring, so it's not happening this year
Yeah,
at
Yeah,
all.
it's not happening. I mean, they haven't addressed it. They won't update the website. But what I think is really sad is that this is actually an amazing conference if you're new to regulatory because it's completely free, it's completely virtual, and it's directly from FDA's mouth. So it's really nice for newbies. What's nice for, more senior consultants like Michelle and I is that it's just like Michelle said, it gives you an idea of how FDA is perceiving or interpreting new things, or it gives you insight into what they consider important in that year. They actually had some very good information on the QMSR transition, and that's more quality related than regulatory. And it was there that we found, a lot of insight into why and how they're interpreting things. So I think this is a shame that they're not offering this.
Yep. So we have a question that says, does draft to final count as a new guidance document, like meaning that 10 have to be withdrawn? While they have not specifically said that, the short answer is yes. Anything that requires new regulation, new thought, officially publishing what the FDA is thinking, does count in what we have seen as 10 needing to be withdrawn. But most of those have been, everything being withdrawn is like mostly on the food and drug side at the moment. And then we have a question, are export certificate fees included in this freeze? And yeah, they're not taking money of any kind for fiscal year 26. So basically, if you are not already in the process of one of those programs and have already paid them, they cannot accept money until that happens. So in terms of inspections, FDA announced that it was going to conduct now unannounced inspections at foreign manufacturing facilities, and that they were the issue was to promote domestic production for namely pharmaceuticals, and then they were going to reevaluate their approach to pre-approval submissions, and the FDA will no longer pre-announce inspections of foreign facilities. But because of the RIF actions, they paused the foreign inspections pilot. And this is significant for a number of reasons. And I've managed several inspections in other countries. And in those countries, you have to have the company and you apply for a work visa for whatever period of time you're going to be in that country. And so there's a whole lot of diplomatic things that have to happen to conduct a foreign manufacturing facility inspection at all. And some of these countries are not necessarily safe for somebody that doesn't know how to navigate them. So to be able to not only do you have to show up unannounced, but you have to navigate this other culture or safety situation without input from, the company that lives and works there. So it's extremely, there's a lot of layers to it besides just, do we tell them we're coming or not?
Yeah, and even with that, there's also, I mean, the biggest one I think of is translation. I've done many, many audits where I'm auditing someone and I only speak English. I'm auditing, kind of to English for FDA purposes. And if you show up unannounced and don't have a translator, like, I don't know how far we're going to get in this audit. So,
So, yeah. Okay. So every year, FDA publishes a List A guidance documents that they intend to finalize. And Ty, do you want to speak to any of this that actually happened?
yeah, so FDA, like Michelle was saying, FDA has a list of A and B guidance documents that they say they're going to update within that year. And they did finalize a few of them, which was they did update the Q submission guidance document for how to do Q submissions with just a few other things. They also did update the cybersecurity and medical devices and predetermined change control plans, our pre-market submission guidance document. I think those are the two biggest ones that came through. There was technically this registration fee waiver for small businesses undergoing financial hardship, but give you the summary of that. Basically, there are examples that you have to show that you paid the fee previously and that you are declaring bankruptcy. So
Right.
and that if to pay the fee would be undue financial burden.
People got a little excited there for a
Yeah,
minute.
people were
Oh,
very
finally.
excited about it. And I was like,
Yeah,
if you
no,
qualify for this, you have
you,
bigger
you
problems.
are circling the toilet. Like that's what's happening. That's the only qualification to be able to get that fee waived.
Yeah, and from the last slide, Ronald had a good note here that, EU is also doing unannounced notified body audits in some
Mhm,
countries, and this has resulted in kind of these delicate diplomatic relationships.
mhm.
So these were draft guidance documents that were released or
Planned.
for draft. But what's more important is that they still have a significant number of guidance documents to update to meet their goals. And to be honest, this is just my theory, is that I think um, what did get through was probably something already heavily drafted and kind of in process. And later in the presentation, we'll show you a few situations where FDA is saying, hey, these are things that we've accomplished in 6 months, that Michelle and I have direct insight in knowing that it was happening prior to that 6 months or behind the scenes. So, and Michelle and I, we were on a call with the agency, and I think, some of the agency people slipped up a little bit and they said,
Mhm.
when we can start updating documents again.
It,
So
it was the same call about that night where they were using the 1995 guidance document and the ISO standard from 2011 and mishmashing things. They're like, yeah, we know that 1995 needs to be redone. And when we're allowed to redo it, we will. But for now, this is what
this
our
is what
thoughts
we're
are.
thinking, which this is very similar to kind of what was happening in like I would say, I don't know, 2017, 2018 around software. FDA had all these internal requirements that they didn't communicate. And unless you were doing software submissions, you didn't know what the agency was thinking. And then they published so many software documents. It's more out in the open and clear. And I think we're going back into, unless you're actively doing it, you will not understand at all what FDA's current position is, because they are not allowed to update guidance documents.
Mhm.
All right.
Exactly.
Okay, before we go on, I'm going to go ahead and launch a quick poll just so you can tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what is interesting to you right now. So I just am going to have this poll going. So feel free to, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then um, we can keep going while people answer, I guess.
Mhm. So there's a good bit of good news, so it's not all bad news. So we have there's a hope of sunshine and rainbows in the future. So this cracked me up. I just typed in, I thought I was having internet issues, and so I just typed in fda.gov to try to make the internet do something. This is the landing page that you get when you type in fda.gov, like directly and not like through Google or something. And this is the FDA trying to take credit for everything that they have done since the administration change. And then they say, and we're just getting started. See the complete list of FDA reforms. So these are the ones that they're most proud of. And then you click through, and it's mainly food and drug. They have not had very many initiatives or any initiatives directly in CDRH, but these are the ones that will impact CDRH. And it's consolidating the fragmented adverse event databases, beginning to release adverse event reports on a daily basis instead of, I think that they were doing this, I think, on a monthly basis before. They completed their first AI-assisted scientific review, and then they launched the internal AI tool known as ELSA to help FDA employees to work more efficiently. So to me, the one on here that's most interesting is ELSA, because ELSA is not new. They have had ELSA in some sort of prototyping or beta evaluation for well over a year, because we got hired for some wild cases where FDA issued the same letter to on the same day to 4 different companies. And it turned out all 4 companies had used the same lab in China, and that lab had falsified their test reports exactly the same way. And this is like 510Ks back to the late 90s and early 2000s. And so FDA has been putting ELSA to work for quite some time. Now, these are the ones that just made us laugh. And it made us think of Blades of Glory, where nobody knows what it means, but it's provocative. So the first one is legitimate, the crackdown on falsified Chinese testing data. They cannot take credit for that. I mean, they can take credit for continuing the crackdown, but the whole issue around the Chinese data that had been happening, like I said, with that example for well a year or more.
I think almost 2 years by that point. So we knew that they were likely training their AI model on old submissions, and that's how they're kind of finding this.
Mm-hmm. And then there are just some others that we just thought the wording was just entertaining of like, okay, what does this even mean? They're unleashing cell and gene therapies. And then we had to, this,
We did have to
next,
Google this one.
yeah.
Ending the 70-year war on consuming natural fats. I was like, wait, does this mean that
Okay. Did-
we don't consume them or we do consume them? And we had to Google this. And again, this happened in December of 2024. They took credit for something that they did not do in the last 6 months, where they redefined healthy and they put foods like avocados and other like high natural fats into a healthy market so that they could be labeled and defined as a healthy food. But it was hilarious. We went through a deep dive on that.
Yep. And then this one we still have not figured out. Lott CEO listening tour with industry executives. Does this mean that they're going to show up like in Phoenix and like I can go up and have a public forum and just they have to listen to whatever I have to say?
Yeah. Pauline also picked one that we saw that made us look, but it said, you know, piloting programs to reduce drug approval times from 10 to 12 months to 1 to 2 months.
Hope
Is
I want to
actually what
see a lot of reactions come up on the screen right now. Who wants to take a drug that went through a 1 to 2 month
review
approval
time.
process? I see.
I see a
I
lot of
have not
shocked
seen
faces here.
I've
I'm
not seen anybody that's like, yeah, sign me up.
mm,
That's the equivalent of being in a clinical trial, I think.
yeah.
Anyway, okay. So this is interesting because there is a lot of stuff that is more visible to the public now and more open for comment, like the reauthorization of the Medufa fees that we are currently frozen on. So this is an ironic one that has been in our deck for a few months. As an example, so, speak now or for several months, how forever hold your peace
Hold your
about,
peace until the new quarter.
uh, also fascinating. FDA has started its own podcast called FDA Direct. They launched it in May of 2025. They have episodes that are updated weekly. They are not all related to medical devices, but if you need a laugh, you should read the transcripts.
The transcripts are pretty bad. I think it's partially their transcript program, but oh, it is painful.
Yeah,
Painful.
they are for sure not editing the transcript that comes out of the podcast. But yeah, in the terms and the sleight of hand and all the things that they use are just is really pretty funny. But there are a handful that do talk about the CDRH, and again, reading between the lines, you can listen or read some of the ones that are about food or device or drugs and like mentally transcribe, okay, what would that same action look like on the device side? Because that's what's happening, is like a trickle down of the same strategy. So the submission review times, the FDA actually published real numbers, and these real numbers are consistent with what we have seen. So this is their 510K numbers is 127 average, and that is composed of about 72 from FDA days and 55 from industry days.
And I would say this is a real silver lining. We'll get to the pre-submission information next, but I do think that where there are resources, it is in the submission reviews. They are still taking those as a top priority at the agency. It might be the only thing that people are allowed to do right now.
Yes. And then this is also interesting. We have some very promising, very good pre-submission review times. And I have seen personally with all the pre-submissions that we've done, as well as pre-submissions that my colleagues have done, that FDA is pretty much on the money with these setting these meetings or giving the written feedback. So here's
And one thing to note here is that so far in the fiscal year of 2025, the maximum FDA's days to written feedback have been 89 days, whereas in 2023 and 2024, you can see there are a couple that get neglected. So I think they are kind of cracking down on this. I did know that, especially in the 2023-2024 period, people who had breakthrough device designation seemed to have a really good engagement for about the first year. And then after that, the response time would kind of dwindle. And I think it was partially because of big turnover numbers. But it looks like FDA is taking that really seriously here.
mm,
And George, really quick, you asked where the FDA podcasts published. To be honest, I only see them on that FDA website, and I just click and you can play them at your computer. I don't know if they're published on Spotify or anything like that.
right. There's a RSS, like sign up for our RSS feed, and I got like 2 or 3 layers deep in trying to get it set up on my machines, and I'll just watch it at my desk or listen to it at my desk. So again, FDA is using AI for its internal processes. My team has all joked about how we want to see FDA's validation of said AI tools. So in customs, they have launched what they call Predict, and it is a program targeting import compliance. So prior to Predict, there were devices of extremely low risk and extremely low value that the FDA just didn't even look at the customs documentation. So now, thanks to Predict, which stands for Predictive Risk-Based Evaluation for dynamic, whatever that means, import compliance targeting. So they look at basically everything now. And
We've had a
then
lot of customs
similarly with
problems.
what?
I said, and we've had a lot of customs problems. I feel like
Yes,
I've
a
had more
lot.
customs questions than I have in a long time.
Yeah. So yeah, it's clearly not helping them sort out problems, just create them. So then we've got Elsa, like we just talked about. And then Elsa's primary target was supposed to be for clinical trial data reviews, which maybe that's how they think that they're going to clear or authorize a drug in 1 to 2 months. It's going to be Elsa that makes the decision if it's safe public. And then we really end up in a matrix world, right? If AI is approving the drugs we take, I'm pretty sure the red pill and the blue pill were pharmaceuticals of some sort. For those of you who didn't react, that is like a reference to the Matrix with Keanu Reeves. You should watch the first one. You don't worry about 2 or 3, but so in conclusion, what does it look like now? The US is in a state of flux, asking me what's going to happen at the end of today sometimes is you can't predict it. In general, for the things that already have fees paid or were already submitted in FY25, which again ended Wednesday, like October 1, we are not seeing any type of submission delays related to those types of reviews. They are using those automated tools more and more. So if you get really odd feedback, it may not be from the actual carbon-based reviewer. It may be from ELSA. So just have that mindset when you're reading feedback from the agency. And then maintain your inspection readiness. They are still doing inspections both in country and especially out of country in
Yeah.
those foreign facilities. We have managed several or had to help people react to several both foreign and US based inspections this year. So
Well, we technically do have more to this deck.
yeah,
We only have 10 minutes left, so I do want to give people time to ask their questions. I'm sorry we couldn't cover everything. And just if you go back to that last slide, Michelle, Dawn was saying that she was in a meeting with FDA this week and that they had 1 to 2% engagement with ELSA in May, and now it's up to 70%. They were super enthusiastic about this as a great IT revolution. I can imagine if your coworkers are dropping like flies and suddenly you have an AI tool that can help you. I mean, I can't imagine the workload that they've got right now.
mm,
Um, but do we want to take a moment for any questions right now? Or
sure.
what are you thinking, Michelle?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. Or I
There
can
was
like
one
fly through the
question.
rest of this pretty quickly.
Okay, there was one question from Dawn earlier, which said, does draft to final count as a new guidance, risking 10 to be withdrawn? Um, I don't, I'm not sure. Do you know the answer to that, Michelle?
I don't know it specifically, but I think it does count because guidance documents are counted in those things that they wanted industry and public input for of what should come out. So if a guidance goes in, they are also counting that because they
And
count it if it comes out.
yeah, I think so too. And then
Mhm.
Vera asked, has FDA released any statistics on the accuracy of ELSA? And as far as I know, no. They haven't
I,
published really anything available to the public about it other than they have it.
I think the real problem with Elsa is going to be that you don't know what you don't know. So that you're going to have inspectors that are and reviewers that are, new to that role and or older ones, but they're just sheerly overwhelmed by the lack of resources and they're going to just trust whatever Elsa comes back and says in terms of feedback and not know for themselves if it's right or wrong. And an example of that is that we like watch a lot of different feeds throughout the week, and we have our own office hours where we debrief each other about things we saw or read. And one of them in a quote, slow news week, said we started talking about the special 510K program. And then in parentheses, it put SBD. There is no abbreviation for special 510K. And SBD means small business designation. Is a whole different process. It is entirely different. And the bot that put this article together said that this is the special 510K parentheses small business designation. It's like, no, that's not. And so you really have to trust that your reviewer knows what they're doing enough to recognize when the AI does it wrong.
Right. So you have to be the expert. And the hard part is that FDA's had so much turnover that they're not going to be able to do that. You know what I mean? Like they've had so much turnover that by the time they get trained up, they're already using ELSA, so they've lost their ability to
To
recognize
think.
it. There were a
Yeah.
lot of questions around Q submissions and the questions thing. So the theme generally is, with the government shutdown, are they still accepting Q submissions? And have we heard if any Q submissions have been rejected? It's a little bit early for us to know because the government shutdown literally just happened on Wednesday, and we haven't had a Q submission in the last 2 days.
And we wouldn't know until like the deadline for the review.
My
Let's say
guess
so
would be
it's
that my guess would be that they're still accepting them, but they're gonna watch and wait to see how long the shutdown might occur for before they make a decision, like back in COVID where they sent out letters saying, hey, we're rejecting your pre-sub, resubmit it, and you're in a queue now. Um,
there other questions, or should I just use 5 minutes and plow through the rest, and then they can follow up with us if they have questions about it?
um, I think, there's lots of questions in here, but we can go through the next, there is still a lot of this deck, so maybe we'll use that time. And if you have questions, feel free to email us after the webinar and we'll get to them.
So this is just how the regulations came finally merged together, and how many years it took, and how many updates of the ISO standards. So in February of 2024, FDA said that in February of 2026 that we are officially transitioning to QMSR, and we thought this was going to be like teaching an old dog new tricks. Specifically because the QSR used to be all about the preamble, which is 70 pages of recommendations at the start of the QSR. And that even back then in 1996, they make recommendations to know ISO 1345 and 14971 back in 1996. So the bigger picture of compliance with the QMSR really looks like you got to comply with ISO 1345, elements of ISO 9000. If you want to know what the FDA meant when they published that, then you need to also read 14971 and the notes in 13485. And oh, by the way, their FAQs say, do you want to understand what we think about the QMSR? Then you also need to read the practical guide. So then, therefore, the QMSR comments become the new preamble of what to expect, except for the areas where they're different. So you're going to die a death of 1,000 paper cuts here, especially if you are also trying to go to Europe and comply with the MDR. So what has the FDA been up to in regards to this? They say that they have updated their IT, they are training staff, they are developing a new inspection process. Although we're getting painfully close to the deadline and we still don't know what they're gonna expect. They have dozens of regulations that they have to revise or redact, and then a lot of communicating needs to be had.
Even though they fired their communications department.
That is funny. Okay. So I just, long story short, on all of these, you'll get all this in the slides. We do have a QMSR class, post QMSR, if you want to make sure we send you the link to be able to sign up for that.
Yeah,
You
put it
get
in the chat and we'll follow up with you.
yeah, you get a certificate at the end of the training program. So anyways, I think that's a good place to stop. We could talk about this for probably 2 hours if we
Probably
stop
too
it.
much. As you can tell, Michelle and I have been doing a lot of research, paying a lot of attention to what's coming out at the agency right now, because it's our job to guide people and,
To the best we can with our magic 8 ball and our intuition.
and sometimes you just have to look at what is happening on the checkerboard to make your next move. So hopefully this was interesting, entertaining a little bit, and
Helpful.
helpful at the end of the day.
Mhm. Thank you all for spending your morning or afternoon with us. We appreciate you coming and listening to our interpretation of what may or may not be happening.